When I hear the word reboot, my mind instantly conjures a hellscape of beloved IPs, twisted beyond recognition, in misguided efforts at updating or modernizing a beloved character. Rarely do these efforts feel authentic to their source material, and as a fan, frequently the term modernize feels like a veiled excuse developers use to subvert the iconic elements of a character in favor of a vision that often feels alien or even disrespectful.
I hate him so much!
However, atop the seemingly endless mountain of failed reboots stands a few solid IPs that I would argue did it right. And among these stalwart few is one title that I believe stands above the rest: Tomb Raider 2013. I'm Harlan Gaming, and I love to engage in discourse and reviews of action games of all flavors, and in this video I hope to explain to you why after nearly 10 years, Tomb Raider is one of the best action-adventure games in recent memory and is still worth playing today. Tomb Raider 2013 was developed by Crystal Dynamics and represents their efforts to update gaming's most durable female icon and reintroduce her to a new generation of gamers. The developers have helmed the franchise since 2003, and their original intent for a new Tomb Raider title on the PS3 and Xbox 360 was simply to deliver something new and fresh.
We didn't start with the idea of doing an origin story, actually. We started with the idea of doing something fresh.
Early footage and concept art showed Lara on horseback fighting otherworldly creatures and Oni. Eventually, the developers crystallized their vision on an origin story, showing us how Lara became the dino-slaying Tomb Raider that's beloved by so many. Gone are the skimpy shorts, the dual pistols, and the confident attitude, in favor of a vulnerable 21-year-old struggling to find the strength of her convictions.
What are you so worried about?
I'm close to something. I'm sure of it. I just don't know if the others will listen. Or even if they should.
The setting sees Lara and a motley crew of characters on an expedition to find the lost kingdom of Yamatai, for a failing TV show helmed by disgraced archaeologist Dr. Whitman.
And then slice him down the belly, like this. Yeah, you got it.
Cut!
We'll dig into Dr. Whitman later, but all you need to know for now is that he's the type of guy to correct his wife for getting the age of his mistress wrong.
You're gross.
While navigating the dangerous waters known as the Dragon's Triangle, the crew is shipwrecked and separated on Yamatai, and the game becomes about survival, finding a way off the island. This task is complicated by the fact that the island itself seems hell-bent on keeping everyone there.
There it is!
And a mysterious cult known as the Solari seek to capture Lara and her friends for unknown purposes. As an origin story, this game has a tall task of making the timid young woman we find at the beginning of the game transform into the icon we know by its end. In other words, the game has to show us that she can go from
You can do this, Lara.
Please come and get me.
to
I'm coming for you all!
To achieve this, the focal point of the narrative is on survival. Survival is the thread that ties all the plot's main elements together. It is the lodestar that guides every character's motivations, their interactions, and decision-making. That is, aside from one character named Alexc, whose only motivation seems to be making Lara fall in love with him. And boy, do we have more on that later.
Who's this little fox, huh?
Yeah, she's cute, huh? Yes, Alicia.
Alicia.
It's my daughter.
Oh.
14 years old.
You need help.
With the story focused on people doing whatever it takes to see the sunrise, the plot is given room to put Lara in extreme situations necessary for her transformation. In my mind, these situations are not about turning Lara into the Tomb Raider as much as they are about revealing that she's been the Tomb Raider all along. This is a careful point because one of the criticisms that has been leveled at this game was how it handled its first kill. Lara is forced to kill a man amid what seems to be a sexual assault, and she has a moment of shock and terror processing what she's done.
Oh, God!
This is a poignant moment in Lara's character development, one that lead writer Rihanna Pratchett wanted to set up as the point where Lara becomes the Tomb Raider.
The first kill for us was a big thing. It's not comfortable to watch, and it shouldn't be.
She doesn't just walk away from that first kill. It really gets to her and you see her become Lara Croft.
It works well due to the powerful voice acting of Camilla Ludlow. However, many have pointed to this moment as a perfect example of ludonarrative dissonance, a term used to describe the incongruencies between a game's gameplay and its narrative. The narrative tells us that Lara is really broken up about this kill, but almost immediately after, you're killing Solari willy-nilly with no qualms. Nathan Drake of Uncharted fame is often the poster boy for this critique, but I have always found the use of the term ludonarrative dissonance to be disingenuous, in its use as a critique little more than an attempt to bring pseudo-intellectualism to games reviews.
Got 30 years experience, 2 PhDs, 1 in East Asian history.
Particularly, I feel that this critique is unfair to this moment. Lara herself acknowledges that it was surprisingly easy for her to kill.
I had to kill some of them. I had no choice.
That can't have been easy.
It's scary just how easy it was.
So presumably her shock is not just that she killed someone, but how easy it was for her to do so. Her realization that she is not as bothered by killing as she thinks she should be is just one more brick down the road of her path of self-discovery. Nonetheless, given the emotion given to the scene, it is certainly dissonant for Lara to talk about how easy it was for her to kill when she does this.
Oh God!
Therefore, my broader argument is with the idea of ludonarrative dissonance itself. It has always been implicitly understood, at least in my own mind, that when you play a video game, there are degrees of separation between a game's gameplay and its story and cinematics. It's something you intuitively understand as a player, and the reason you don't freak out when a character gets shot during gameplay, but you do when it happens in a cutscene. In general, I believe a game's story should serve its gameplay, that it helps motivate you to want to finish the game. Yet between the two, gameplay should always be king. The challenge of writing a narrative for a game is that you're writing a story around hours of gameplay where the player has autonomy over much of their experience.
Games development can be quite harsh on narrative. You know, you can lose levels or characters. You have to be amazingly flexible.
This hierarchy of gameplay over story is appropriate in my mind because a game can be good with a terrible story because it has good gameplay. But I do not believe the same can be said of the reverse. Games have existed for ages without the need of a strong narrative, and they were good games because they were fun to play. Narratives have become more prominent as technology has improved, but they are accoutrement to the core experience of playing video games. There are some obvious exceptions where narrative is a crucial, if not core, aspect of what makes a game appealing. But my main issue with ludonarrative dissonance as a critique is that it seems to suggest that the narrative should have preeminence over the gameplay as a rule and not an exception. When you do this, you're forced to place the weight of a game's story on its gameplay, which can adulterate its enjoyment. It's fun to take out enemies in Tomb Raider and Uncharted because the shooting mechanics make it fun to do so. I don't believe the enemies that I fight are a literal representation of every enemy killed in the game's narrative. They are obstacles designed to give me a challenge and a good time as a player. I do a lot of stupid stuff during gameplay just because it's fun, or I want to experiment with no expectation that what I'm able to do should have a meaningful impact on the narrative. Obviously, narrative and gameplay can harmonize for some truly unique moments that can only happen in a video game. But other times, forcing story elements on gameplay can come across as extremely cheap. It has gotten to the point that games with high production value and expensive cinematics are seen as pushing the industry forward while ignoring how the narrative forces constraints upon gameplay. They had to add the ability to skip cutscenes 4 months after the new God of War came out because heaven forbid players miss the incredible one-shot of footage they've already seen. Heaven forbid Kratos jump because that would look too goofy when Hollywood comes down from Olympus to look at the latest imitation of their work in video games. Heaven forbid I'm allowed to shoot too many people in an action-adventure game without the character breaking down into tears. Have not Metal Gear Solid and Grand Theft Auto already shown that you can have ridiculous, fun gameplay with a well-told narrative? I mean, there are literally hours of cutscenes in Metal Gear Solid with endless pontificating about nuclear arms and the privatization of war, but when you're in gameplay, the game does not stop you from rolling into enemies with a barrel because it's silly. And who hasn't gone on a rampage in GTA or stolen an airplane just for the fun of pushing the game's systems? I just worry that the future that some want for video games is one where gameplay is subsumed by the story in some ill-defined effort to say that, see, video games are art. Apologies for the rant, moving on. Lara is put in some of the most brutal situations I've ever seen for a video game protagonist. Without ever veering into gratuitous violence, the game manages to sell the brutality of what Lara endures. The game does an excellent job at crafting a believable, vulnerable, yet powerful Lara. She is not a caricature of her past incarnation, nor a subversion of her true character. She is Lara Croft, and a definitive version of her character, at least in my eyes. Now, unfortunately, the game spends so much time developing Lara that its supporting cast tends to suffer.
Because it's all about Lara, isn't it?
If you don't collect optional materials giving you insight into their thoughts, you will likely walk away from the characters thinking they are nothing more than objects for Lara to save. It's a shame because there is depth that's hinted at each character. There just isn't a lot of time dedicated to exploring it. There are exceptions. As I mentioned before, Whitman is a schmarmy, self-important person who's entertaining because of his astounding lack of self-awareness.
Lara, you remember her, my young protege. She has real data to back up her theories, but she doesn't have my savvy.
He is used sparingly throughout the story, which prevents him from becoming tiresome because he literally cannot help but be condescending whenever he's on screen.
Come on, Lara, chop, on your feet.
It's okay though, because it makes his comeuppance all the more satisfying when it happens. Alexc, on the other hand, is a character that I can't help but spoil. He basically does nothing throughout the entire story, except at one point about midway through. He decides he's going to go out on his own and retrieve a part the crew needs to help them get off the island. While admirable, going off on his own is admittedly foolish when you have an island full of crazy cultists coming after you.
What's wrong?
Alexc should have been back by now.
Can't you morons do anything right?
But that's no problem for Alexc. Why? Because he wants to impress Lara.
I wish I could be more like Lara. She blows me away.
Alexc, we were getting worried. I'm gonna need a breaker bar and the rest of my kit. I can't fix this boat without them.
All right, I'm on it.
Lara is heading your way. You should wait for her.
Lara? No, I got this. I'm heading in. Going radio silent.
Alexc, what are you doing?
You can probably guess what happens, right?
Lara, what are you doing here?
What's going on? Are you alright?
I've been down in here. It doesn't look good.
It goes terribly and Lara has to save him, but he actually doesn't get to be saved. He somehow manages to be pathetically trapped under some falling rubble and has to sacrifice himself for Lara to escape. And what's the prize for his sacrifice? A kiss on the cheek.
Loser! Loser!
Lara never really mentions him again, nor is there a reflection of how she really might have had feelings for him, or that he may have been a hero. Not all supporting characters are poorly realized. Roth is extremely well written, serving as a father figure to Lara following the tragic death of her own father. It's unclear what the circumstances were surrounding the death of Lara's dad, but it is clear that it was traumatic and has caused Lara a lot of self-doubt. In comes Roth, serving as the Obi-Wan to Lara's Luke Skywalker, pushing her to realize her potential and guiding her with his Yoda-like wisdom. And I have to admit that Roth has some pretty solid lines.
I know about sacrifices.
No, you know about loss. Sacrifice is a choice you make. Loss is a choice made for you.
It would be true if you said that Roth was a simple mentor character, and his story certainly follows all the tropes common to that archetype. Nevertheless, he is able to rise above the tropes and become a memorable character due to the earnestness behind the interactions between him and Lara.
You can do it, Lara. After all, you're a Croft.
I don't think I'm that kind of Croft.
Sure you are. You just don't know it yet.
All said, this is a well-told origin story. It suffers from conventions inherent to action-adventure games. Think Uncharted stirred at heel turns and you'll know what I'm talking about. Nevertheless, it managed to rise above these conventions due to the strong realization of Lara as a character. Levels in Tomb Raider are an absolute joy to experience and offer best-in-genre level design. An excellent balance is struck between providing Uncharted-style linear set pieces with more explosions than a Michael Bay film, and relatively open levels that provide meaningful rewards for players willing to explore. It also helps that the game is gorgeous nearly 10 years later. Although technically confined to an island, you'll visit a variety of biomes, including snow-capped mountaintops, derelict bunkers, and of course, tombs. Typically, when you start a new level, you find yourself in a semi-open environment with an objective you can beeline to if you simply wish to push the story forward. Equipped with tools that you unlock as you progress through the campaign, you can simply rush from point A to point B, mowing down anything in your path. However, careful exploration will net you with a number of items that can aid your playthrough. Among these are relics, which typically come in sets of 2 or 3 and offer more insight into the game's world. You'll find salvage that can be used to upgrade Lara's equipment and can also harvest native flora and fauna. Level-specific challenges are also available but tend to be pretty menial tasks, such as lighting statues or stealing bird eggs. There's a Metroidvania aspect to the level design where some areas will be inaccessible until you possess the right equipment. This provides incentive to revisit levels after Lara has received all of her upgrades. Each of these activities provide XP that's used to enhance Lara's capabilities across 3 different skill trees. I typically never collect collectibles in the game because to me it always feels like a waste of time. But the little bit of XP and lore that these items provide actually motivated me to seek them out.
Could it be from Kublai Khan's lost fleet? Oh wait, it's a fake. Made in China.
Beyond XP though, collecting all the items in the game unlocks secrets and extras that you can view on the main screen. The crown jewel of the levels though are the 7 optional tombs. Tombs combine all the reward types into one activity, granting you salvage, XP, and weapon parts. None of these tombs are terribly challenging, and most can be completed within 5 to 10 minutes. A lot of the would-be challenge is neutered by the game itself telling you what you need to do if you don't figure out the puzzle quickly enough. In areas where I actually could have used a hint, the game was completely silent. Regardless, the tombs are the best side content on offer and so compelling that I was disappointed when I finished all of them. One last note about the levels is how strong of a visual presence they have. Whether trying to convey menace or majesty, the cinematic flourishes to the environment manage to evoke a variety of moods simply with how well they are presented. Take this level for example. I'm confident this environment is an homage to The Descent, a movie where a heroine is forced to discover how far she is willing to go to survive. Or notice how this camera zooms out when Lara rockets down a zipline. Each level is filled with little moments like these that make you take a step back and appreciate how much effort went into making these levels a joy to experience. If there is one thing that I hope people come to my reviews for, it's for a meaningful appreciation of combat mechanics and difficulty. Even if I'm not capable of Donguri style videos, I love to appreciate the effort developers put into making combat both challenging and fun, which makes examining Tomb Raider's combat an interesting case. Even on hard mode, combat is never quite challenging, which would normally be a deal breaker in my books. Yet the shooting mechanics are so engaging that I often found I was having too much fun to notice how easy it was. But let's zoom out for a second. Tomb Raider's combat rests upon 3 pillars. The first and most important are its shooting mechanics, the second is stealth, and the third is melee. Let's talk briefly about the stealth and melee since they are the more minor elements of combat. Stealth is pretty straightforward. Lara can sneak up on her enemies and execute them with her pickaxe, or take them out with silenced weapons like the bow. In the game's playground-like open areas, the stealth enables you to feel like a predator, slowly taking out enemies one by one. However, most often stealth will only see limited utility due to a fatal flaw in the mechanics common to games of this era. That is, if one enemy sees you, everyone automatically knows where you are.
Need backup! Let's move up, come on! You got it!
It's a bare-bones system that, while enjoyable, is not something that should be relied upon to consistently get you through fights. Then there is melee. Now obviously it would be incredulous for Lara to be able to take on an island full of men with her bare fist.
I'm gonna kill you! This is for Vladimir, outsider!
The game smartly addresses this without preventing you from enjoying melee combat entirely. In the beginning of the game, if you try to engage in melee with an enemy, Lara will only be able to shove them away. However, after you unlock the pickaxe and a few upgrades, you'll be able to stun enemies by throwing dirt in their eyes or hitting them outright with a pickaxe. Once enemies are stunned, you can kill them with a finisher.
Finish him! Futility!
However, the best part of the melee combat is the perfect dodge system. Given that Lara is weaker than the men she'll be fighting, emphasizing her ability to counter enemies is a clever way of allowing her to engage with those bigger than she is. Execute a dodge at the perfect time, and Lara will execute a counter that opens an enemy up for a finishing blow. These are some of the coolest animations in the game and really sell the brutality of the combat. It's simple but feels more layered than something like Uncharted, where oftentimes you're doing little more than mashing the attack button. However, the shooting mechanics are the crown jewel of Tomb Raider's combat. You'll gain access to 5 weapons throughout your playthrough, each with her own unique characteristics. Since Tomb Raider released when Hunger Games was at the height of its powers, Lara's primary weapon is a bow. Though primitive, the bow has the benefit of being a naturally silenced weapon and can be upgraded with fire and explosive arrows. Then there is my personal favorite, the handgun. While Lara doesn't use the dual pistols like her classic counterpart, the accuracy that this weapon provides is more than enough to compensate. Though it can be upgraded to shoot automatic shots and have less recoil, none of them feel necessary because this will likely be used as your headshot machine, requiring little more than accuracy.
Time to die!
However, one nice upgrade is a silencer that expands your options for stealth. Then there is the rifle, which can serve as your equalizer when you're outnumbered. It has terrible recoil, though this can be compensated for through upgrades, but it is best served as a spray and pray weapon when you simply need things dead without time for accuracy. This becomes especially true when you get the grenade launcher upgrade through story progress. It can also be equipped with a silencer if it wasn't powerful enough. Finally, there is the shotgun, which, if I'm being honest, is my least favorite of the 5. It can be upgraded with flaming rounds, but since it's a close-range weapon, it's unclear what the difference is shooting an enemy up close with regular rounds versus flame rounds. It does have the benefit of having the sickest execution animations in the game. Unlike in many third-person shooters, there is no noticeable weapon sway when Lara aims her guns, which for all intents and purposes gives her perfect aim. While you still have to compensate for recoil, you can be confident that wherever the cursor is where your first bullet will go. Additionally, all weapons feel like they have close to limitless range. The exception is the shotgun, which is fun to use for other reasons. This makes each weapon so powerful that there is little strategy in deciding what to use for what situation, and it essentially all boils down to what weapons will net you the most headshots. Headshots are the centerpiece of shooting mechanics in Tomb Raider. Never have I played a game that made me feel more like John Wick.
Just give me.
Enemies have extremely generous hitboxes, and through upgrades you can actually get a reticule that lets you know when a shot will be a headshot. Doing so reveals that headshots essentially extend from the crown of an enemy's head to their clavicles. This leads to scenarios where just shooting in the general direction of the enemy will sometimes give you a headshot. I mentioned earlier that all weapons can be upgraded through salvage. However, I should recommend that you be frugal when deciding which weapons to prioritize first, as salvage is a limited resource accumulated throughout the course of a playthrough. I personally managed to upgrade nearly every weapon in the game to the max except the bow, and this was with a significant amount of exploration. If you're playing casually, you'll likely have to decide between 1 to 2 weapons as your mainstays. Tomb Raider features some satisfyingly reactive enemies. Again, most of the reaction is from headshots, but the game actively encourages you to shoot enemies in the knees to set up executions if you have the skill unlocked. These executions are brutal and have the added benefit of bypassing helmet. Even if you don't want to close the distance, simply downing enemies with the shot to the knee can be a way to set up easier headshots. If there is one obvious failing to the combat, it's that enemies are not consistently challenging nor intimidating. In the middle of the narrative, it becomes clear that the Solari are just people like you trying to get off the island.
Just want out.
Listen, brother, we all do. But it's not gonna happen. The storms will never let us leave.
They are clearly villainous and deranged, but not necessarily intimidating. This is partly due to story reasons, as Lara is shown consistently to make a fool of them. I mean, they capture her at least on 2 separate occasions only to have her escape. And in gameplay, they often just expose themselves from cover for no discernible reason. And finally, shooting them as they rope in on zip lines makes them seem hilariously unthreatening. Later on, you'll fight these ancient supernatural samurai who ostensibly should pose more of a challenge, but when you see that they have no weapons aside from bows and katanas, you realize that they are bringing literal knives to a gunfight, which goes about as well as you would expect. This is not to say that Tomb Raider is bereft of any difficulty. These aren't stormtroopers, and if they can get you out of position or get their hands on you, they will kill you. However, these moments are few and far between, which is disappointing. Nevertheless, revisiting this game reminded me of how fun the combat system is, and makes me look forward to revisiting the sequels even if I don't review them on the channel. To sum it all up, Tomb Raider 2013 may go down in history as the best reboot of all time. It certainly brought me into the franchise and has me looking forward to where the series will go on next generation consoles. I hope this review has given you a fresh perspective on why I believe this game is worth playing to this day, but leave comments in the below letting me know your thoughts, and thank you for supporting this channel. This has been Harlan Gaming,